Hello, everyone, and welcome to Scicomm Monday. I'm your host, Nicole Wood. Thank you to everyone for being patient as we worked out some technical difficulties with today's broadcast. That's the fun thing with riding this wave of technology. We're really right on the forefront of it, so sometimes everything works perfectly and sometimes it doesn't. But thanks for sticking around for today's broadcast, and we're really excited for what we have in store for you today. For those of you who are new to Scicomm Monday, feel free to engage via the integrated chat module here on Periscope. Send in your questions. We'll do our best to get to them. If we don't answer them right away, feel free to resubmit them. Sometimes we don't always notice all the questions coming in. Or if you're watching this on replay, definitely feel free to tweet us via our different Twitter handles. You can reach me either at the Scicomm Monday handle or at my personal handle of Wildlife BioGal. And I'm really excited for our guest today, Brian Engh. He is a paleo artist that does a lot of really amazing work. I can't wait to show you guys all this cool drawings. It really does bring these prehistoric animals to life, but you can reach him at his Twitter handle of Gray Griffin. And with that, I am really excited to have Brian on the broadcast. Thanks for being here, Brian.
Hi, thanks for having me. This is exciting. I'm glad we hacked our way through the technical jungle of crossed wires and whatnot.
Yeah, it's always the fun thing is you always end up learning something new when it comes to this broadcast. I feel like every week with it is kind of an adventure of stuff. So we learned this week that apparently FaceTime does not work very well with the broadcast. So.
Now we know. Now I have Skype properly installed on my phone. So.
Exactly. But it made it fun. And it's a good bonding experience between host and guests.
I feel like every time I try and use Skype, I have to reinstall something or figure out some kind of password change thing. It's it always, I don't know, it's the only thing I have that problem with. And so anyway, I'm glad we got it all sorted out. Yeah. Maybe the next time I Skype, it won't be a huge technical issue.
Exactly. So, but I mean, we really appreciate everyone for waiting around because we definitely are having a number of folks tuning in right now. So we really love that you guys were able to stick around for the broadcast today. We won't be cutting it short just because we started it late. So feel free to sit back and enjoy a full session of Scicomm Monday. So Brian, with all of your really cool art and stuff, how did you get into it? What got you interested in doing paleo art?
Well, basically, ever since I was a little kid, I like drawing and I like monsters. And natural history is full of real monsters. So when a lot of make-believe things from your childhood get taken away by reality, it becomes clear that there's a lot of stuff that's in the imaginary realm that isn't real. But the fossil record is concrete. It's real. And in many ways, in a lot of ways, it's way more fascinating and insane than a lot of the stuff humans make up. And so for me as a kid, it was always this place to explore possibilities and that kind of push your perception of what's possible in reality. And then, as I just have always been drawing monsters and weird stuff like that. And I've always been fascinated with natural history. And then I kept that going through college. I went to school for film production and animation. And then outside of college, I've worked as a freelance illustrator, basically through the internet and through opportunities to talk to people like this. I built relationships with paleontologists, and through that shared mutual interest and the fact that I have a skill set to offer them to help communicate, to help do Scicomm with the amazing stuff they're finding. I basically developed relationships and started getting commissions doing paleo art, and it's kind of crept into my professional menu of what I do, and in the last few years, it's become the main source of commissions and income for me. So, yeah, I've been, I guess, really fortunate to live in a time when there's tons of amazing scientific discovery going on, and this crazy technology that allows us to connect with people all over the place, and just a lot of interesting opportunities to communicate new science as well as make art in new ways and use it in new ways to educate people.
Yeah, that was one of the things I found really interesting with the work that you do is I feel like you're taking these things that would be hard for most of us to imagine and you're actually breathing life into them. You're putting them into an environment that we wouldn't necessarily be able to imagine ourselves, but you're able to, fully flesh it out and give it, just that image that we need to be able to like completely picture how they are living. And so how do you go about doing that? What resources are you using to be able to figure out, okay, this is what that would have looked like? How much of it is just your imagination versus how much of it is the science that is driving what it is that you are drawing?
Yeah, as much as possible. When I'm collaborating with scientists or educators, I try and draw as much as I can from the known scientific research and use that to inform all the little details in the environment and in the look of the animals. And then because the fossil record is obviously really incomplete, I then have to draw heavily on what we know about living animals and living environments and what they look like. And so, in a lot of these cases, what I'll do is, I look at a ton of reference material, but also, as I mentioned, I've always been into natural history, and for me, that's been uh, mainly expressed through like going outside and spending a lot of time outdoors. So I've also, in addition to like doing paleontology, helping with field studies, going out to the sites to see the fossils and the geology, talking extensively with the paleontologists. I've also participated in wildlife biology studies throughout in California mostly, but then I've done field work in Utah and so yeah, basically trying to bring together a huge amount of information from the worlds of paleontology, the worlds from living animals, and from under like part of it is also aesthetics and art too. So like you're trying to communicate not only what we know about the science, but you're also trying to communicate our best hypotheses about what these things might have looked like when they were alive, and then also trying to give the audience a sense of wonder and a feeling for this space. And so, the choices you make in terms of what materials you use and what coloration and stuff like that can all kind of influence what that overarching narrative and that overarching feel of the piece is. On the Periscope stream right now, you've got a video that I've made from my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/dinosaurs reanimated, which is showing the process that I went through while reconstructing basically the carcass of a prehistoric fish called Xiphactinus, which died in Colorado when Colorado was covered by a giant inland sea. And so one of the things I've done is created a series of videos on YouTube that have, with the goal of communicating the science of what goes into the art, but then also like talking about, okay, where are the creative decisions there? And that's something that I feel like hasn't been done enough with paleo art. Historically, paleontology and paleo art are young arts and sciences. And for the most part, you just get presented like, here's the fossil skeleton and here's the painting of the animal next to it. And one of the things I've been trying to do is communicate more about, okay, where is the science and where is the art and how does it relate to our living world? Because ultimately that's the whole point of studying paleontology. Wonder and beauty and awe aside, like we need to understand how this planet works. So my goal with the art has been to like try and do more to communicate, what the heck this art is all about and why it looks the way it does. So.
Yeah, I know I'm loving watching, the video here, like showcasing like, where you get your influences in for helping to, add in more to that life, that, the image there where you're really kind of showcasing this is what it lived back then. So are you taking, a lot of influence from today's animals to be able to say, okay, this is possibly what it looked like back then, or is it just, a lot of just pure imagination, or just a combination thereof of everything?
It's definitely a combination. In the case of this Scyphactinus art specifically that you've got on the screen, we know some concrete things about it. For example, this was this huge predatory fish. These things got to be, we don't have a complete skeleton, but we can tell from the bones that we do have, we can compare it to complete skeletons of the same type of animal, and we know that this is a big fish. It was like a 12 to 15 foot long, huge fish related to a tarpon. So we know it's related to a tarpon because of its skull morphology and the shape of the rest of its skeleton. So that's comparative anatomy. So we look at where tarpon live, what they do, and we get a sense of, okay, maybe this is about what the animal should look like. But the reason we're illustrating it as a carcass, and all this is kind of explained in more detail in this video. The reason we're doing it as a carcass is because we know that its carcass settled down in deep water, and you can tell that from the geologic record. The kind of sediments that you get deposited in deep water are getting deposited in deep water in modern times. So we know this thing died somewhere offshore, got deposited in deep water. And for me, the thing that was really cool about this project and is that this particular carcass was found with shark teeth associated with it. There's this type of shark living at the time. It was about the size of a large tiger shark. It was called Squalocorax. And this thing was a big carnivorous shark with huge serrated teeth, and it was dropping these teeth not only by this carcass, but there have been other Scyphactinus carcasses found with Squalocorax teeth associated with them, and in some cases actually embedded in them. So we know from the fossil record that this was probably a pretty common species interaction, because fossils don't always get preserved, and when they do, it's reasonable to speculate that they're what's usually getting preserved is kind of like a common behavior or an average. If you randomly pick a point from a plot of like, okay, things that these animals did, you're more likely or not, you're going to get a random point that was something that happened somewhat regularly. So it's pretty reasonable to assume that this Squalocorax shark tooth associated with this Scyphactinus incomplete specimen was probably because this thing was getting shredded by sharks in deep water. And in the deep water environment, the other thing that's interesting about that, the rock layers lay down really evenly and really calmly. You just have what we call like snow, the organic snow settling onto the bottom of the ocean, laying down these even layers. There's not a lot of currents to jumble up and destroy a skeleton, but this Scyphactinus skeleton was very incomplete. It was torn apart. So we thought I was working with paleontologist Rebecca Hunt Foster on this. This was for a poster she presented at SVP last year. And we wanted to show not just a badass predatory fish, but we wanted to show a badass predatory fish getting torn apart by a badass prehistoric shark, because that's known from the fossil record to be something that was going on back in the Cretaceous period. So then I started looking at modern animals and environments where this stuff goes on. This is still happening today. Large fish, whales, marine mammals, they settle to the bottom of the deep ocean, and they become this important ecological system where all of these things converge on the carcass to extract the nutrition that's bound up in that carcass. So this marine biologist called whale falls, and when it's a whale, but then it can happen with sharks, it can happen with big tuna, manta rays. So I looked at a lot of pictures of stuff like that, and that's kind of where I got the idea for the color schemes that we used and the sense of environment that we had. It's made the illustration intentionally really dark, not totally black, because this isn't the super deep ocean. This was a shallow inland sea, so it was, probably if maybe a few hundred feet deep. So it probably would have been darker than my picture in real life, but people got to be able to see things. You can imagine that you're seeing it from the view of a Squalocorax shark that has really acute vision for dark environments. But yeah, and then one of the things you'll see in the video is a lot of reference images of Nautilus and octopi. Octopi, Nautilus, squid, cuttlefish are part of this group of animals called cephalopod mollusks. And we know that cephalopod mollusks were abundant in the Cretaceous period, and many of them belong to a group called Ammonites. And Ammonites are these interesting creatures with coiled shells like a nautilus, but back then there was a whole bunch of different types that aren't around today. There's a huge diversity of these things. So one of the things that we have going on in the illustration is a couple different species of ammonites kind of converging on this carcass and feeding on the carcass or feeding around the carcass, because this carcass is, presumably, just like in modern times, it's become this important part of the ecology that's attracting things to it, and kind of a food web is growing around this big dead fish. So again, one of the things I've been doing is on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/dinosaurs reanimated. You can see these videos where I'm explaining both the creative process and the scientific process, and how paleo art is this really fascinating intersection of those two worlds that can be used to communicate a lot of science and hopefully get people more interested in both the history of their planet and what's going on in modern times, and with living ecologies. So, yeah, check that out. Also, my website is don'tmesswithdinosaurs.com. That's where you can see the art and the videos and all that stuff. Shameless plugging, but got it. This is Scicomm Monday, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm fully for shameless plugging because I do it with my own stuff anyway. So, and we want people to be able to extend past Scicomm Monday, to be able to, just get like, a taste of it here and then be able to take it past this so that way they can really explore. Because I know with prepping for today's broadcast, I was just going through just what seemed like pages and pages and pages of paleo art that you've done. And it was so hard trying to pick out what things we were going to showcase on today's broadcast, because there was way too much to put on today's broadcast alone. So definitely for everyone out there, go check it out. I mean, there's some really, really cool art, and it's not just dinosaurs. You're dealing with other prehistoric animals. And then I also have to say, like, I really liked the monster series that you had there, because I was out, visiting with an old coworker of mine, and playing around with her 5-year-old son, and we were drawing monsters, and it was just like, oh, maybe one day he'll be like Brian Engh, drawing monsters and dinosaurs and everything. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, ultimately, what I do is I tell people sometimes I'm just like a professional, like 7-year-old, essentially. So yes, that's awesome. I thoroughly enjoy what I do. But for sure, it's there. What I do is part of what makes it exciting for me is that there's so much to be drawn from what we already know about living animals and prehistoric stuff, and that also influences, like what people will see on my website is also like creature design, so fictional creatures, as well as like storytelling and music videos, all kind of based in that world. And all of that stuff is still rooted in my fascination with natural history and my desire to tell stories about, the world that we all live in and its crazy ancient history. And just like, I don't know, like to try and I have to do some fictional stuff to kind of like get at that feeling of like there is so much mystery and wonder out there to still be accessed. And we live in interesting times.
yeah, no, I was going to ask you, like, how much does you doing those fictional drawings of those monsters that you do, how much does that really help and influence when you're having to do your paleo art? And does it like help make it where you've got that wider imagination that you can put yourself into that world, that ancient world, a little bit better? And does it help, or just is it something as simple as helping your technique, so that way when you are drawing these dinosaurs or other ancient creatures, that it's like you've got that practice down, that you can really pop them out and bring them a little bit more to life?
Yeah, all of the above for sure. Because one of the things you can do with fictional creatures, like more easily than with scientific stuff, is you can get at like a feeling, right? Like if you want to convey like the disgusting feeling of like seeing wanton destruction from a war, right? Like that's an emotional human experience. So like with a fictional creature, you can create like a giant, horrendous, like being that's just massed together from human corpses, and it's this living entity, and it creeps across the land and devours civilizations, right? So like that is a creature design that like harkens to a human experience and like a feeling that you can't really like just say, or you either have to like look at horrible documentary footage of war, or you have to like create a story, like a myth essentially. And that's what monsters have done for humans for a long time. In a way, I view making paleo art kind of like creating our modern mythology that's rooted in what we understand scientifically. So for sure, I mean, ultimately, in some ways, like paleo art is all fictional too, because we don't get to see the real animals. We got the fossils, and we have our imaginations to try and flesh these things out and communicate what is known, which is part of the reason why I'm making like the YouTube videos to try and explain, okay, this is what we know, this is what's imagination, this is what's inferred from living animals. Um, but yeah, doing the fictional stuff is for sure, it helps me with technique. It also helps me like think in terms of storytelling, because ultimately when doing science communication, we're telling some kind of a story. And then yeah, it's and for sure it's just like, as an artist, you want to get loose and like your imagination, allow ideas to swirl around and interact with each other in unexpected ways. And that's, I think, one of the things that has helped me as a paleo artist communicating with scientists, is that we'll have these great discussions where we hash out a whole bunch of different ideas. We do a ton of brainstorming and rough sketching, and as an artist, I kind of see it as my role to like just like throw a few wild cards in the conversation, like, okay, well, what if it was really this, or what if it was that? And like in the case of that Xiphactinus carcass getting eaten by a shark, it was because I was saying stuff like, well, it would be kind of cool if we showed it getting fed on by a shark. That then the paleontologist like, oh yeah, well, it was found with a shark tooth associated with it. So by like throwing out different ideas, we can actually push. As an artist, I can contribute something to the conversation, and that a scientist who may be thinking more in like a technical way, or what's thinking about like what is definitely known, like the shark tooth with the Xiphactinus that I illustrated. It was just found associated next to the carcass, wasn't embedded in it. But then, when you get started talking about all these different ideas, then one thing can lead to another, and you'll ultimately end up with a better piece of art if you're willing to consider multiple options. And so, yeah, for sure, doing the fictional creatures and creature design stuff is major for me, to like just keeping the imagination juices flowing, and having something more to contribute to the conversation than just like, well, I could make it like look blue because it's underwater or whatever. So
Right. No, yeah, I really like your idea of telling a story here. And I'm going to throw up one of the drawings that you've done of where I don't really know what kind of dinosaur it is, so I'm going to completely depend
okay,
on you to explain what it is. But it's
sorry.
it's the image here with the crocs underwater, and it looks like you have some herbivores that are trying to escape from a predator. And I really like. I mean, it is. It feels like you're really telling a story here. Can you maybe go through and explain a little bit of
Sure.
the story that you're telling?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and this one's a great example because I don't have a YouTube video of it yet. I have a bunch of footage shot. But so this is a scene based on a specific fossil site that you can visit in Utah near Moab. There's this area called the Mill Canyon Bone Trail. And the reason it's called the Bone Trail is because you can see dinosaur bones from Jurassic dinosaurs embedded in the sandstone along this interpretive trail. It's like a little half-mile trail just like 15 miles north of Moab, Utah. So anybody going through Moab, Utah, they should definitely check out some of these public fossil sites. This illustration was done for an interpretive panel. It was commissioned by Utah Bureau of Land Management paleontologist Rebecca Hunt Foster. And if you look closely in this illustration, in the bottom, kind of the bottom right, you'll see there's actually a skeleton of a dinosaur getting buried by the sand. And the reason we put it in cutaway view is because when you go along this trail, you see those same layers and those same bones in cutaway view, because water has eroded through the layer cake of time that was deposited by this ancient river system, and you can actually see those bones that are in cross section along the trail. And the reason we did this illustration, it was done along with another one that shows what we call this our Morrison wet season scene, and then our other one is the Morrison dry season scene. And the Morrison formation is this huge and really complex rock formation that's a bunch of states in the Southwest. It actually continues into the eastern United States underneath a bunch of other layers. The tectonic plate of North America kind of dives down, but the Morrison Formation is exposed in Utah, Colorado, Montana, a little bit in Wyoming, Oklahoma. It's this sprawling, vast, late Jurassic depositional environment, and one of the things we see in the rocks from the Morrison Formation is we see evidence of seasonality. At this site called the Mill Canyon Bone Trail, we have these layered sandstone rocks with pulses of gravel. We say pulses because where we get that kind of rock in modern environments are river systems where you have like braided streams depositing sand. They're kind of low energy, right? Anytime you're getting just little sand grains, that means that the water is probably not super energetic. It's not moving really fast. But then you get seasonal flood events that move larger rocks, tumble them along the river, and get gravel lenses, what we call lenses or layers of gravel. And you can actually see all that in this illustration. And so what we've got here is in the foreground left, these are some long-necked dinosaurs called Camarasaurus. They're one of the most common sauropod or long-necked dinosaurs found in the late Jurassic North America. And we've got them crossing what's supposed to be a flooded river channel. So this is our wet season scene where the river channel is flooding, and as a result of its flooding, it's burying skeletons that accumulated there during the dry season. It may also be drowning some animals. We see similar dynamics going on in modern environments, especially in like West Africa. You'll have these African river systems that flood seasonally. They catch wildebeest and zebras and things that are trying to cross. That becomes a food source for predators along the shore, like lions, and even in the river, like crocodiles. And all of these bones then, either settle in the river or get washed down the river and shoved up against the sandbar and then buried. And we see the same exact patterns in the rock record from 150-something million years ago. And the reason why we've got crocodiles in this scene is because in the background, if you look closely, there's a big carcass of a larger Camarasaurus dinosaur, and it's getting fed on by a swarm of crocodiles, as well as there's a turtle incoming, like kind of in the middle of the frame. There were turtles in this environment, and turtles will eat just about anything, so I had to put a turtle in there. And then around the carcass on the shore, converging on it, are pterosaurs, which are a group of flying reptiles, not related to birds. They're distantly related to birds and dinosaurs. And then there's the apex predator from this environment, which was Allosaurus, these massive, saw-toothed, terrifying predatory dinosaurs that got nearly as big as T-Rex. And so we've got them converging on this massive carcass. Again, you've picked another one of my pieces that's kind of about carcass ecology. You get when large animals die, they become this important part of the ecosystem. And so we wanted to communicate to the public how the bones that you can see in this trail might have gotten there and how they got buried. There's another illustration on my website that's what we call our Morrison dry season scene that shows how in the dry season the riverbed would have dried up. You would have just had little streams and water holes that would have probably attracted these large animals to them during the dry season. And then, animals stressed by drought or attacked by predators or sickened from not finding enough food in the dry season, a lot of those bones would accumulate in these places where you get aggregations of animals coming down for water. And then wet season comes, those bones get buried just like what you see in this illustration.
No, there's so much to this piece that I didn't even notice the first time I was looking at it. Like I never even noticed the sediment, burying the bones in there. It's just that, when you've got that quality illustration, there's so much to it. It's not just that one, focused species. You really are truly telling a whole complete story that is putting you in that world, and you can imagine being there.
That's the goal. And so this illustration at the site is part of an interpretive sign that explains a little more of this. And the goal of doing that is so that, these bones are just out there in the desert. And there have been bones taken illegally from the site. It's on public land, so the fossils there belong to everybody. In order to excavate them, people would need to be a accredited scientific researcher and apply for a scientific research permit, and then the bones would get excavated and reposited at a museum where anybody can study them. So they belong to everybody. They're on public land. They need to be put into a public institution where anybody can see them or access them if they're an accredited scientist. So part of the reason for us wanting to tell this story is to show people, look, these things aren't just an object. They're not just a curiosity. It's not a souvenir for you. This is a piece of this really intricate story of life on our planet that tells us valuable things about how life works and how our planet works, and that there's a consistency in how ecologies work, and we can infer things about our living world from the past and vice versa. If you were to go to this interpretive trail out in Moab, near Moab, Utah, you'd see the sign. It has a text blurb and few other things explained. And then if you're paying attention on the trail, you will see those bones that are in the bottom right of that illustration actually embedded in this massive layer of sandstone. And I hope to be able to put together a YouTube video explaining all that when I have time or money or both.
Right. Yeah, that always seems to be my thing, is like finding time and then also finding the money to be able to support all
Yeah.
of that stuff. It's never enough. That's one of my old committee members once told me. There's three things that you need for a research project, and then also, with science communication, it works just as well. You need people, time, and money, and you never
Yep.
get all three. And so
Yep.
it's
Right now, I don't seem to have enough of any of them.
right.
But that's life.
Yeah, and
Um,
so speaking of like some of the time aspect of it, you have some of these images up of where it looks like you've illustrated out some of these dinosaurs before you actually are putting them into the full scenery of everything. How much time do you spend, creating these dinosaurs, running it by these different scientists or different museums before you actually then go and put it into the actual full scene? Like, what's the time process of, say, maybe just an average piece that you're doing here?
so like, for the one that's up on the screen, this is a head reconstruction of the earliest horned dinosaur known from North America. So a relative of Triceratops. It's called a Quillops, but it's this little chicken-sized thing. I did this illustration for a press release, and for a scientific paper describing this newly described little horned dinosaur. So this illustration starts as a pencil on paper drawing that to actually like render that pencil on paper drawing is probably like 4 or 5 hours of work, and then there's a good 6 to 10 maybe going into coloring this one. But then prior to that, there's a lot of discussion with scientists, and a lot of rough sketches that go into it, and it varies from project to project how much of that rough sketching and discussion goes into it. In the case of this little guy, it was kind of a lot because all we have of this animal is a single crushed skull. So we had to go through a phase where we were basically reconstructing the skull. The skull is relatively complete, but it is squished. So to get an accurate idea of what this animal's skull looked like, we had to look at better preserved skulls from closely related species from Asia. This guy was the earliest member of this Asian group of early horned dinosaurs that we know of coming over to North America. So we looked at the skulls of some things like a dinosaur called Archaeoceratops, another thing called Liaoceratops. And fortunately, in the Asian environment where those things were living, a lot of really nice skeletons and bones were getting preserved. So we could look at we had this little crushed skull. We could look at that and compare it to the three-dimensionally preserved skulls that we had from these horned dinosaurs. And we came up with a few different, slightly different skull reconstructions. I was working with Dr. Andrew Farkey at the Raymond Alf Museum on this. The skull reconstruction that was published in the paper was done by Dr. Matthew Wadle. And then there was also another skull reconstruction done based on our work by the Oklahoma Museum, the Sam Noble Museum of Natural History in Oklahoma. And each one of our skull reconstructions is very slightly different, but I think it was a cool exercise because ultimately we ended up converging on basically roughly the same skull morphology, looking at the related animals and our crushed little skull that we have. So then once we have that skull reconstruction, then we go into the rough sketching phase of like, okay, what should the soft tissue look like? Where should the jaw muscles be? How much jaw muscle? How big should the beak be? What should the skin texture look like? And all of that is drawn from a combination of the fossil record and also anatomy from living animals. I've participated in a number of dissections. I've been fascinated with anatomy for a long time. So that all factors in. There's actually a talk that I did at Nerd Night in San Francisco, which is like another science communication event, and it's for grown-ups. So there's some swear words in that talk because I get really passionate and excited about my stuff. And this was like a 21 and over event, so I could swear about dinosaurs and hopefully make it a little more entertaining and accessible to an adult audience. But yeah, if you look up on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/dinosaurs reanimated, there is a full talk on that little dinosaur that you had up there explaining this whole process. In the case of that dinosaur, I did that head reconstruction as well as a reconstruction of what it in its environment might have looked like. And altogether, I think it ended up being about a month and a half or 2 months of solid work to do all of those illustrations and all the rough sketching and research that went into that. So yeah, there's the on the screen now the life reconstruction and all of these plants and this whole environment and that little mammal that's chasing the baby aquilopses. That's all drawn from the fossil record from the area where this little horned dinosaur skull came from. So all of those ferns, the roots of that tree are based on a redwood tree because there was a relative of redwoods growing at that place in time. There's a baby, one of those trees just under the tail of the dinosaur on the left. And then, yeah, all of those ferns are known from the fossil record. I consulted with a paleobotanist named Nathan Judd, who was studying this specific site locality and the plants that were coming out of it because, again, this is all part of the larger story of life on Earth. And one of the interesting things going on in this environment is it's in the early Cretaceous period around 110-ish million years ago. And in this environment, it's the very beginnings of flowering plants are starting to show up. Most of the plants in this illustration are ferns and conifers, so they don't plants that don't make flowers. But tucked away here and there, there's a couple little early, what we call angiosperms, these early flowering plants. So for me and for the paleontologists I was working with, it's important to like try and get the environment to really feel right. Maybe, we can speculate here, maybe these early horned dinosaurs took off in North America because they co-evolved with flowering plants as flowering plants took over the environment in the early to late Cretaceous period. We don't know that for sure yet, but again, it's like by encoding the art with all of this information from the fossil record and what we know about living animals and anatomy and all this stuff, we can start these conversations and start new lines of inquiry that we wouldn't otherwise without the art. So I got a little sidetracked off of how long it took. This illustration is like 2 weeks of drawing, 2.5 weeks of painting in the computer, full time, like 8 to 10 hour days. So.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, no worries. Like, I love hearing all that because it really showcases the research that you're having to put into these pieces. It's not that you're just like, oh, I'm drawing this cool dinosaur that I kind of think how it looks. Like, you're really putting a lot of thought into it, with the plants that you have in the background. Like, you're trying to make this as accurate as what science is saying that that we know at this time that it is back then. So
yeah, well, and for me that's kind of the fun of it, right? Because like I love nature, right? I love going on a hike and seeing a bluebird do something that I didn't know bluebirds did, or finding a rattlesnake like sunning itself in this like weird position on a rock or whatever it is. Like I love being surprised and learning from nature. Right. So in doing these illustrations and kind of like subjecting myself to like, well, whatever is in the fossil record, like that's what we're going to try and figure out a cool way of incorporating into the art. It's really fun for me because it's like it gives me an excuse to just like do tons of research and see all these cool fossils and talk to all these fascinating experts who know a lot of stuff that isn't communicated to the public or isn't readily. Like you really have to talk to a paleontologist and or see the fossils at a fossil site in person in order to get all the information. And so, I mean, for me, it's like, yeah, let's go, let's check this stuff out. And like, let's see what the art will be when we're done based on whatever we can find out. So yeah, there's definitely like a nature nerd detective mode that I go into. It's like, well, what color should the rocks be or the sediment or whatever. So I love that stuff.
Yeah, no, that's all great. And I love too, like you can take what scientists are learning and be able to like truly, flesh it out for everyone because we don't all have that artistic ability. I dabble with painting and things like that, but I'm nowhere near the skill level you are. And if I was trying to illustrate out what my species that I study, the invasive mute swan, was doing, it would not turn out very well. It would be a lot of probably stick figures and things like that. So like having people with your talent be able to do that could really showcase to other folks is really, really good because if it was just left to me to illustrate what was going on, people would be left wanting and not really get the drama of what's going on with this ecology or these different species. And so it's really good that we have people like you that can do this because I know for me a lot of times just hearing about something is kind of neat, but when I can see it or do it, it makes it so much better. And so the fact that you're able to like showcase that and like we can see it, then we can imagine it so much better and have more appreciation for it too.
Yeah, that's the goal. And like in the case of studying living dinosaurs like you do, in the case of you said it was called the mute swan.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, like the cool thing about that at least is like you can photograph it, right? You can
Right.
film it,
Hmm.
and then that's a skill in and of itself that you have to practice and develop, and you got to get the right equipment and everything like that. But you have that. In the case of paleontology, there are so many weird animals and weird ecologies that we can't directly see. Like you have to use imagination to access that stuff, and you have to like really get embedded and like engrossed in the fossil record and the research in order to get a sense of all of what should be there. And yeah, so as a paleo artist, I have this unique role in that like good paleo art can really make or break a research project, which is why I encourage paleontologists like put paleo art as a line item in the grant because it'll pay for itself in the long run. If people know about your work, you're going to have an easier time getting grant money in the future. You're going to have an easier time getting your stuff into exhibit. Your museum's going to look nicer. You're going to buy people are going to buy tickets to see the new exhibit that features nice art. But
Yes,
yeah,
I'm slow clapping to that right now. I mean, that's just yes. I mean that's definitely something that everyone really could know about for sure. Like that's it. Really like if you get people to know about your work, you're much more likely to get that funding. You're much more likely to get those collaborations, and you
mhm.
need to like the one of the best ways to showcase your work is getting that drawing out there that people can see and they'll remember and they'll associate it with you. And it's like yes,
Yeah.
so that's a great point to make for all the scientists out there.
Happy to shamelessly plug my work.
Yeah.
But
But
yeah,
it's truly important though. So I mean it's one of those avenues that different scientists need to think about if they want to be able to find a way to be able to showcase their work so that way they can keep getting that funding. You need to
yeah,
sell yourself, and one of the best ways to do it is to really be able to showcase your animal. And if you can't take pictures or video of it like I can with mine, you need someone like you to be able to help them to be able to do that. And it's a really important point for those scientists, especially as funding is becoming so limited nowadays.
yeah, for sure. I have had I've already in recent months have had projects threatened or shut down because of the limitations of funding due to our current political and government situation.
Right.
But yeah, and I know like I've talked to some scientists and they're like, ugh, I don't like selling myself. Like I just want to do research. I want to do the best research I can, and I want my work to stand on its own merit. And that's noble and good, but it is not uh, in concert with how the world works, unfortunately. So if it makes you feel ooky to be like self-promotional, don't think of it as promoting yourself. Promote the hell out of the organism you're studying. Promote the hell out of the ecology or the idea that you're studying. As long as your name's attached to it, like you're going to be the person who gets the funding, it's going to help you. But focus not on like because there is a lot of gross like academic posturing and like statusship and elitism, right? And a lot of good scientists really just like feel gross about that and don't want to be a part of that, which is why I encourage people who are doing good work, like don't be a part of that. Be a part of communicating to the public what cool stuff you're like, show people the cool stuff. As long as your name's associated with it, it's gonna benefit you. So like, don't worry about that. And if you're really sincere in communicating what all the awesome stuff you've learned, and from that space of like, from that place of like just genuine like love of life and of your experience doing research, you'll actually promote yourself better because the public clues into sincerity. They love people who love their stuff that they're working on. It gets people excited. You inspire future scientists. You inspire other scientists to get back to the roots of like, why are we doing this? Oh, we're doing this because it's beautiful to be alive. It's fascinating to live on this planet. We're on the best planet we know about. And we get to like have this intense and intimate relationship with life and reality as people who are invested in science. And like, yo, if you can just focus on that and then put some money in the grant for me to help you make art so that we can give that to people, like that's powerful. And it's something that I really like strongly feel the world needs, is like people need to be shaken and shown like you are part of this stunningly beautiful and amazing system that's been here for an incredibly long period of time. And like you can be a part of helping us to understand that. Like you, the public, everybody, like we're all in this together. And that's the beautiful thing about science is that it should be collaborative. It shouldn't be about like me and my hoity-toity scientific academics standing in tenure and all that bullshit. Sorry.
No, you're
So
good. You're good.
we're on. I don't know what the rules are about swearing, but yeah, like science should be about people coming together to understand the planet that we're all on together, and you know, hopefully live as well as we can. But
Yeah, no,
yeah,
I couldn't say it any better myself because it really is. That's one of the big things I think is sharing our science with others. That's one of the reasons why I started Scicomm Mondays. I wanted to be able to share this science that all of these great people are doing, all the great science communication, things like, like you're doing with your sci art, and be able to showcase it out to the public in a way that they might not have had access to it before
yeah,
because we could do all this really, really amazing science, but if we aren't getting it out to the public and sharing it with them, it's almost like what's the point?
yeah,
I mean, I can learn that these mute swans that are invasive are damaging our ecosystems, but if I can't educate the public about that, then they're not going to make any of those policy changes that are going to be able to help protect our native species here that those invasive mute swans are having an impact on.
mm,
I mean, I could do all the science, but
yeah,
there's, if they don't know about it, nothing's going to be done. And so that
yeah,
damage to the environment is still going to happen. And, you could take that example and just, take it all the way across the board of all science. And you have to get it out to the public in some way that they can grasp a hold of it and take ownership of it and be able to use it in their daily decisions of life.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, engage them, and very often you need to engage people on like a visceral level because, and that's what I think something art can do is kind of attach a feeling or a mood or a color scheme to the scientific concept and an idea that it really grabs people in a way that text on a page won't, especially if somebody, like a lot of the public isn't immersed in the science. They don't imagine this stuff on the regular like we do. They don't think about, for example, yeah, like how a species like the mute swan, it has this range that's expanding or contracting depending on the selective pressures on it. They don't imagine this whole story. So if you just write in, especially in like very dry scientific terminology, what's going on, it doesn't give people the sense that there's like this ecological battle going on between these different migratory species and native species and human influence on the environment and how that ripples through this whole ecosystem. So yeah, it for me as a paleo artist, it's like the importance of communicating that stuff is taken to a whole nother level where like these species aren't even here, but they can tell us stuff about how our planet works. And yeah, it can definitely be a challenge though too, because as an artist, like as we've talked about, like I try and encode as much data, as much known fossil stuff, as much known stuff about living animals into the art as I can. But again, like if there isn't that science communication aspect of it, a lot of that's lost on the public because they see animals swimming across the river with a few crocodiles and they're like, what's going on here? But until that story gets told, even as an artist, it's like it's important for me to do the science outreach so that people actually know what's going on in the art and can have the story interpreted for them. Even with the visuals, it can be, there's a lot in the world to understand. It can be overwhelming, and people get bombarded visually all the time by
oh yeah.
commercials, dumb movies, and product placement and all that stuff. So,
And even good movies and stuff, there's only so much that you can watch and handle and things. It's like I can't binge watch every TV show out there I want to, but
yeah,
it's like, yeah, so being able to help people, be able to see this and get interest in it is definitely needed. I just want to send a quick reminder out there to everyone. If you're watching, definitely feel free to ask Brian or myself any questions through the integrated chat module here on Periscope. And if you're watching this on replay, or say if you're watching it live and you're just too shy to ask a question, definitely feel free to tweet us after the broadcast via our various Twitter handles, and we'll do our best to answer your questions then. So you don't just work on dinosaurs, even though dinosaurs are really awesome and really cool. You do other prehistoric animals too. So I know we're working on an installation with these mastodons.
yeah.
What museum were you having them installed at? What got this project started? And what is so awesome about other animals besides dinosaurs that got you interested in drawing these?
So yeah, I just recently finished this big life-size mastodon illustration for the Western Science Center in Hemet, California, and I actually got involved in this project because of doing Scicomm and Twitter. The marketing director for this museum is active on social media, and we somehow got into a conversation, and she invited me down to see the museum. Struck up some conversations with them there, and then a few months later, they were preparing to do. They have a temporary exhibit space where they have exhibits for a few months at a time, and the museum director, Dr. Alton Dooley, shout outs Alton Dooley. Also shout outs Brittany Stoneberg at the museum's marketing director. She's on Twitter at Britton Bowen. You can also follow Dr. Alton Dooley on Twitter. And the Western Science Center and their mascot, Max Mastodon, are all on Twitter, and you can follow them and find out what's going on with them. But yeah, they wanted to. The Western Science Center is this really nice science museum in Hemet, California, which is kind of off the beaten path. It's southeast of Los Angeles, out in the Inland Valley. A lot of people outside the Inland Empire. A lot of people outside of the Inland Empire, the Riverside, California area, don't even realize that this museum's there. It's a little bit out of the way, but they have the largest number of mastodon individuals in collections there than anywhere west of the Mississippi. So what a lot of Californians only have kind of a little bit of an understanding of is that just 10 to 15 to 20,000 years ago, California was completely full of bizarre, huge mammals, mastodons, mammoths, camels, huge lions, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves. There was this huge ecology of megafauna living in California that's all now very recently extinct. Down there in Hemet, California, they were excavating this. They were expanding a lake reservoir called the Diamond Valley Lake, and they started finding mammoth bones. And so the museum has this amazing collection of mastodon specimens, and they wanted to do an exhibit showing the public like all of this stuff from this local area that they have. So they have a number of incomplete skulls, a bunch of limb elements, vertebrae, all kinds of stuff. But the coolest thing that they have is this massive male mastodon skull. It's like about 36 inches long, so a little over a meter long, and they've nicknamed this guy Max Mastodon. And on the screen here, you can see me standing in front of the life-size mural that I did. So this was done, again, as like a pencil drawing that was painted digitally like the other stuff I've done, but then we did it to a high level of detail and blew it up to full size. So Max Mastodon is about 12 feet tall at the shoulder. He's got a head that's about a little over a meter long. He's got about 2 meter long tusks coming out of his face. He's the one on the right. And the reason he's the one on the right is because he's getting hit in the jaw by the other mastodon's tusk. Mastodons, just like bull elephants and just like a lot of other animals, the males will have territorial fights, especially when elephants go into this state called must, where they go into this like crazy hormonal state, and they need to battle each other in order to figure out who's in charge. Max was this big old male mastodon. He lived to a pretty old age. He was an unusually large individual, and we know he got smashed in the jaw because he's got this bone pathology on his jaw. He got hit hard enough in the jaw in a couple different spots where the bone was damaged and then grew and healed and remodeled. So you see this gnarled, damaged texture on the jaw. And he's got another spot where like the damage actually caused the bone to grow into this weird knob of bone growing on the front of his jaw. And the position and the shape of the injury on the jawbone is consistent with what we would expect to see from a big old heavy tusk striking this jaw. Mastodons are different from mammoths and elephants in that they have a more elongated skull and they have massive tusks. Max Mastodon's tusks are about this big around, about 7 inches around at the base. So I don't know, that's like maybe, like 10 centimeters or something like that? Maybe more, like 12 centimeters. This massive, huge, thick tusk. And this skull that's angled a little different than what you would see in like modern elephants. And so, yeah, Max he was a big, formidable old male. And so when they were putting this exhibit together, they wanted to kind of show what an awesome kind of star of their museum they have. They have this awesome skull, a few other bones from this big male mastodon. And so we did this mural to illustrate this kind of like patriarch of the Diamond Valley Lake ecology, this big old, successful male mastodon who is a brawler. And, we know he fought because he has these injuries. One of the other crazy things about his jaw is that he got hit in the jaw so hard that Alton Dooley, the paleontologist there, he's pretty sure that the jaw was knocked like slightly off axis, like the joint was damaged enough that this guy was then chewing crooked for the rest of his life because his teeth are worn at this funny angle. Mastodons and elephants have these big molars in the back of their jaws that they replace a few times during their life. But Max was done replacing his molars, so his like final adult set of molars got worn at this goofy angle because he was walking around with like a Popeye jaw as a result of getting clobbered by another dude. But we know he survived because the bone healed and he lived long enough to actually like wear his teeth down unevenly. So again, there's this whole story in the fossil record, and until you can show people it visually and create opportunities to talk about this stuff and like promote your organism, the public just doesn't know. There's all these fascinating stories to be told and so much to learn. And one of the other fun things about this mural was that it's so recent. The dinosaur stuff I've done has been, the non-bird dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago, which is an unfathomable expanse of time. A lot of things were different. The continents were in a different position. A lot of the plants and other animals living at the time, very different. Max Mastodon died 13,500 years ago. So everything else in that painting are plants and small animals that are still alive in California today. There's a flock of California quail fleeing from the mastodons, battling each other. You can't see it on the website version, so you got to go to the museum to see it, but there's a life-sized collared lizard, which is a lizard that lives in California today, and he's running away through the grass from the mastodons. He's kind of in front of one of their feet, but he's too small to see in the web version because they're so big. They're 12 feet tall, and this is a little, 10-inch long lizard running away. There's also a couple other insects and lizards hidden in the illustration that you can only see if you go down to the Western Science Center in Hemet, California. So it was a fun job, and it created this unique opportunity to show Californians that like you have this native megafauna that went extinct just 13,500 years ago. All the other plants and stuff, all the other animals are still here in one place or another in California today. In fact, fun fact, all of the plants in that painting are inferred from seeds that were found inside of Max's skull. When his skull was buried by the river sediments washing into this basin that would later become the Diamond Valley Lake, the water washed sediment containing plant seeds into his brain cavity. And so when they washed that out, they got all that dirt and stuff out, and they screen washed it, and they looked, and it has all these identifiable modern plant seeds in it. So in the painting, there's big leaf manzanita, a type of grass that's common in the Great Plains today called Buddleia grass. There's ponderosa pine, Monterey cypress, all modern Western United States plants, many of which grow in California still, washed out of a mastodon skull.
Wow. That is so cool. I mean, I would never even thought of like, how do they get those plants? But like, it actually was right there with the specimen that you were working with. I mean, that's some really neat stuff. And so like the last thing I really want to talk about here is you've got, this really cool drawing of what we're discussing is like, we think it's called the K-Cops, but like, what was the fun way that you were saying it? Because I really like that a lot.
I like saying Cacops. Because it sounds like a bad guy from like He-Man or something. It sounds like a horrible swamp monster creature, which is basically what it is. This is my most recent finished little piece of paleo art is this illustration showing this really ancient animal. So we were talking about mastodons 13,500 years ago, a blink of an eye in geologic time. This animal is from a period of time that I wish more people knew about. It's called the Permian Era. And it was this period of time before the age of the dinosaurs that was full of really, really unusual creatures that all went extinct before the age of the dinosaurs. There was the worst mass extinction that we know about happened about 245 million years ago. The Earth had this massive volcanic event. It dumped out all this CO2. There's runaway global warming. The oceans got toxic and were spewing out toxic gases, and all these weird animals went extinct. And because they're not dinosaurs and because they're not depicted in a lot of paleo art, the public doesn't really know about them. So the creature that you had up on the screen a second ago is this weird little amphibian. Well, not little. It's a good-sized amphibian. It's about the size of a chihuahua. It's called cacops or cacops. The paleontologists I was working with say cacops, but I had been talking to them in text form, so in my mind it was cacops for like a long time. But cacops is cacops, whatever you want to call it, was this weird amphibian monster that was its bones were found in a cave system, and it was probably living outside of this limestone cave system that was collecting animals either by trapping them or them getting their carcasses getting washed into it later. But what's really cool about this thing, and you can see this in better detail on my website, don'tmesswithdinosaurs.com, Cacops's jaws are just full of teeth, and not just its jaws, but the whole roof of its mouth is covered in this carpet of these little tooth plates. And so yeah, on the screen here you can see our interpretation of what the environment might have looked like back when cacopses and skeletons were getting deposited along with the skeletons of a few other animals. So big shout out to this is work by Yara Harady, Brian G, Robert Rice, and what's Mark's last name? I'm blanking out. The stuff on the paleo environment was done by, I want to say Mark McDowell, but I don't want to screw that up because Irish names are really easy to conflate with each other. Let me make sure I get this shout out right now. But yeah, I was working most closely with Brian G and Yara Harady. They study histology, which is the study of how things develop based on you can look at the growth rings in bones and teeth. And what they wanted to figure out was, okay, this weird amphibian thing, it has this carpet of these little bone plates on the roof of its mouth. And they wanted to figure out, are these toothy projections on the roof of the mouth, are they little teeth, or are they developing by some other developmental process? There's a lot of ways to make a spike of bone that you can poke your prey with. And what's fascinating about this thing is that when they cut apart these tiny, tiny little teeth on the roof of this creepy little amphibian's jaws, and they found that it was developing these little tooth spikes, these little plates, just like it was developing the teeth in its jaws. So there was that tells us that there was some type of unusual evolutionary genetic pathway involved in creating this strange feeding apparatus. And so I thought it was just a really terrifying looking mouth for a monster. And so, when Yara was telling me about this, I was like, oh, I gotta draw that. Like, the public needs to know that not only is there this specific creepy little amphibian monster, but we need to start getting people to realize that there was stuff before the age of the dinosaurs. Hundreds of millions of years worth of animals. This animal, Cacops, lived 289 million years ago. That's 40-something million years before there were any dinosaurs. And it was living in this unusual environment that was there was limestone caves that animals' bones were getting deposited in for one reason or another. And the interpretation of the environment, I'll get this shout out right now, they were from Mark McDougall. He's another paleontologist working at, these are all grad students at the University of Toronto at Mississauga. And they're doing amazing work out there. And it was one of these situations where I was like, I gotta do some collaboration with these people, because what they're doing is they have this angle on this period in Earth's history that so few people know about. And there's all this fascinating stuff going on. So yeah, that was just a fun little project. It's not dinosaurs at all. It's an amphibian, but it's this weird amphibian living in this highland environment with limestone caves, and for some reason evolving just a nightmare carpet of teeth in its strange little bear trap jaws. So we had to show it trying to eat another one of the animals in the environment, this little thing probably related to the ancestors of lizards. I mean, this is how long ago this is. There wasn't lizards yet. There were these other little animals called captorinids, which are these weird little they're little reptiles. They're very lizard-like, but they're not quite lizards yet. And they also have really unusual dentition in their mouth. And that's actually what grad student at the same University of Toronto, Yara Harady, is studying, their unusual tooth development. One of the interesting things about studying tooth development is that you can create developmental models by studying living animals, comparing it to the fossil record. And then with the living animals, you can actually map out the genetic pathways that are creating these different modifications to an animal's teeth. And you can, one of the things that's interesting is that these genes that affect tooth development are sometimes coupled with genes that affect the bone that the tooth is growing out of, for example. So by cutting apart these tiny fossils, these minuscule little tooth plates, you can actually start to get a window into the developmental and genetic biology of animals that have been dead for so long that we can't even fathom how long they've been dead for. And so it's just another interesting window into like how life on this planet works and, you know, what it tells us about our own world.
Yeah, no, I really like it. Like I've got, up on the screen right now, one of the original photos where it still has, all of that, cave rock all around it. And it's so interesting to see like, this is what they pulled out of that cave and what you're able to get out of it with this drawing. I mean, it's just from that to this is so cool. And it's just, I mean, if you look at, just the original, specimen that they brought out, it's like, none of us would be able to imagine this, but because of you and your ability to translate that into this image, you were actually able to picture what this creature looked like so many millions and millions and millions of years ago.
Yeah. So when it's not just it's the art too, but a part of what has to also happen. There's another step in the paleontological process. That's another thing that a lot of people don't realize is there's something called preparation, where you get these nodules. That previous picture you're showing was a Captorinid skull that cave rock had kind of grown up into and around. Now, some of these bones that they find, none of the bone is exposed. It's been completely engulfed by cave formation. So they excavate these rocks, and then they have to go back to the lab and painstakingly remove the outer calcite layer that accreted around that bone in the cave. So there's like so many different processes that go into our understanding of, how life on this planet forms and develops, and also how these environments change and develop. And one of the ongoing pieces of work that Mark McDougall in particularly is looking at is like, okay, were these animals living in the cave? Were they falling into the cave? We know some of them were getting washed in because there's evidence of like jumbled bones and things really like, clay sediments getting washed into the cave. But I thought it would be cool to illustrate Cacops and the Captorinid kind of living around the entrance of the cave. I've been in some modern desert environments here in California where limestone caves are getting used as shelters by lots of different wildlife. You have this little area in the mouth of a cave where it will retain moisture, especially if that cave is like north facing, so it's not getting hit by sunlight very much. You'll have this cool, moist spot in the middle of this super arid desert. So I thought it would be cool because Cacops is an amphibian. Amphibians need to retain moisture. They don't have tough, scaly skin like reptiles, keeping all their moisture in. I thought it'd be cool to show this thing in an environment where they're kind of using this little micro-ecological niche in this dry desert environment to survive. But yeah, again, there's a lot more to be studied and understood, and that's kind of the larger story here is that like there is so much we don't know, and we got to get out there and explore, really keep doing work.
Yeah, I mean that's for sure, and there's definitely a lot more for you to draw out there. So as we're already going over time, but this stuff is so cool, I was more than willing to do it. Why don't you tell everyone all the places that they can find all of your art, and then different ways too. Like I know you've got your Patreon site. What other funding sources are you having out there that like people can maybe, if they are enjoying your art and want to like commission you, what ways can they get a hold of you that way as well too?
So yeah, the best way if you want to actually support my art directly is to hit me up on Patreon. I'm on patreon.com/historian himself, which is a reference to like a musical universe that I've created that's linked to my monsters and to my paleontology stuff. But yeah, patreon.com/historian himself. You get behind the scenes sneak peeks of the projects I'm looking or that I'm working on, like while I'm working on them. A lot of this stuff, especially if it's scientific stuff, I can't really put it out publicly until like the papers go out or whatever. Some of the stuff I can put up on Patreon. Other things that I'm working on involve special effects, practical effects, building puppets, making music videos and short films and stuff like that. And I don't want to put out all the magic publicly early. So some of that stuff's going up on the Patreon. That's the best way to support me directly, because you're basically just supporting me doing my art directly. So I'm really fortunate to be getting a decent chunk of money now from Patreon, and I want to keep building that because that gives me greater autonomy as an artist, and that's good for everybody because then I can make more crazy stuff and not have to like hustle as much on freelance gigs that may or may not be related to telling stories about Earth history, for example. Like I do freelance work for the entertainment industry and stuff like that in order to help pay the bills. But yeah, so Patreon, best way to support me. My website, which is kind of the hub of all my finished projects, is don'tmesswithdinosaurs.com. Even though it features a lot of non-dinosaur stuff, I just felt like that website captured the attitude of me and my work. So don'tmesswithdinosaurs.com. I'm on Twitter at Greg Griffin. You can also find me on Facebook, Brian Engh Paleo Art, and YouTube. I've got 2 channels. One is like my weird music videos and monster stuff called Historian Himself. The other one is Dinosaurs Reanimated on YouTube. So yeah, I appreciate you letting me shamelessly plug all of my gazillion different things that I'm working on. And,
well, don't worry.
Yeah.
I'm about to do it with all of our stuff over here for Scicomm Monday. So, and that's the best thing I found with science communicators and things is like we really help try to support each other with things. And so it's, anytime that we have people on, they've got those, channels that we can, send people to, I'm all for it because I know how much, I appreciate on my end when I've had people help publicize things that I'm doing and stuff. So we got to help support each other so that way we can, keep making all this really awesome stuff happen.
It's all about collaboration.
Yep, exactly. So with that, I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. And I really want to send a big shout out, thank you to Brian. I mean, this was some really cool stuff. This is the first time we've had anyone like you on here that's doing like this art and everything. And it's really neat to see how the process happens. And I really hope people go out and check out all the rest of your stuff because it really is cool and it's definitely worth doing. Like I know I'm going to be pulling up some of your art and showing it off to my niece and nephew next time I see them because it's some pretty cool stuff that you're doing. So
one of my target audiences.
Yeah.
Young imaginations.
Exactly. Yes. And so it's really cool and I really hope everyone checks it out and definitely, if you're whatever you're doing in the future, we'd love to see it, back here on Scicomm Monday at some point in time because I think it's some really, really cool work you're doing and a great way to outreach to, not just scientists, but the public, and you really help bring those species to life in ways that we never could without you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Great. Well, if you want to get a hold of Brian, definitely feel free to tweet him up. You can reach him at Greg Griffin on Twitter. So like if you're watching this on replay and you want to ask some questions of Brian, feel free to reach him there. If you want, if you've got questions about the broadcast, you can reach me at Scicomm Monday or at my personal handle of Wildlife BioGal. And then just a shout out for next week, we're going to have Heidi Trudell. She works with birds and the impacts that bird strikes on windows can have. So we're going to be talking to her about ornithology and how we can protect birds with modern buildings. And then I just want to send some shameless thank yous and shout outs for Patreon to all my Patreon sponsors out there. Thank you very much for helping to support the broadcast. It really makes this possible because of all of you. And then a special shout out to Jason Leathers, who's one of our major Patreon sponsors. He is I4MSU on Twitter. So big thank you to him. And if you're interested in helping out the broadcast so we can keep this going and make it even bigger and better, please go to our Patreon site, which is www.patreon.com/Scicomm Monday, and see how you can support the broadcast because every little bit helps us to be able to keep this going. And we'd like to, like I said, make it bigger and better and incorporate more ways that we can showcase everyone's science and their science communication. And if you're interested in being on the broadcast, just like Brian was today, definitely DM us and we'd love to have you on. We showcase people from all over the world doing all sorts of different science, all sorts of different science communication. So definitely feel free to hit us up and we'll see about getting you scheduled into the broadcast because we want to showcase all the science that there is out there. It's I mean, I might be an ecologist, but I love all the different science and science communication. So we love to have all sorts of folks and science communication on the broadcast. And with that, I want to say thank you to everyone for tuning in. Please go out, explore, do some science, have some fun, and we're going to see you hopefully on the next Scicomm Monday.
Thanks a lot for having me.